Hello everyone. So obviously we're in 2026. It's hard to believe that we're in 2026. We are in 2026. And of course, this pretty much a few days ago, 100 years ago, was the first census. Now they do this every few years just to get a grasp of how many people in the country, the needs of people, etc. But the first census conducted by the Irish Free State, and of course that was before Ireland became a republic, etc., dominion of the British Empire after the War of Independence, the Civil War, etc. So huge things happened, obviously, years before that, in 1926. Obviously, you had the Easter Rise in 1916, the First World War was going on, of course, at the time, and then obviously the 1920s, the War of Independence, the huge amount of upheaval in the country, the huge amount of violence, etc. And then obviously the Civil War too, that divided the whole country, and then the separation of the six counties in Northern Ireland. So a huge amount of stuff was going on in Ireland at the time. And of course, the census, the population. But the thing I find the most extraordinary is it's interesting because I've been looking at the last hour or two. I found my great grandmother. She was in commission among the Irish Women's Army, I suppose you would call it, hiding people, what the bit of black and tans, the OIC, hiding them in the house, hiding weapons in the house too. Thinking about it, even looking at it today, I was like, what does she take of it? Because again, she put her life on the line to make the state become a reality, and many people did. And people fought the British Army, etc., to make Ireland become a reality, to make Ireland become a free state, and to become a republic in the end, too. And I wonder what she thought when she was filling in that census. It wasn't actually her that filled it in, it was her husband, it seems to be, that filled it in. But I wonder what she thought when she seen it, that it says the Irish Free State after, nearly probably 20 something years under British rule. I wonder how she felt and about, the War of Independence and the Civil War particularly. Her active role in the War of Independence, saving many people's lives, saving many people that were fighting for Irish freedom. I wonder how she felt when the form was given to the Irish Free State. It was no longer a part of the British. It was no longer British authority. And I wonder what she would think now. We hear Micheál Martin. The reason why I want to talk to is we hear Micheál Martin yapping on today about fucking the tricolour, as they say, the tri flag, as is famously said nowadays. And he's on, but people have taken it and stuff. Of course, the government have pretty much betrayed the Irish people in every regard. Like, imagine saying to somebody in 1926, after somebody that fought in the War of Independence, that fought for Ireland's freedom, for the very soul of this country, fought in the War of Independence, even in the Civil War, regardless of what side they were on, they were all hoping for Ireland's future, they were all fighting for Ireland's future. There was no really right or wrong side of the Civil War. The whole lot of them wanted the future for Ireland, the best for Ireland. Of course, the government today want they don't want the best for Ireland. They want the worst for Ireland. It seems to be. But it's hard to imagine going back if we could time travel now to this day, 1926, and show them a video on the phone of Micheál Martin saying a backwards looking idea of sovereignty. We want nothing to do with a backwards looking idea of sovereignty. I wonder what they would think of that, because as you know, in the proclamation of the Irish Republic in 1916, sovereignty is mentioned 3 or 4 times. It was very important to them people, Patrick Pearse and James Connolly, that it was included 4 or 5 times. Like, it's not that it wasn't excluded. And it very clearly stated in black and white that the only people who has ownership of Ireland, ever will have ownership, is the Irish people themselves. And the people in the War of Independence, they wouldn't fight for the European Union. Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, is saying they were fighting for the whole European Union. They were fighting for trans rights and this right and every other right. Like, come on now, be real here. The whole reason of the War of Independence was that after 800 years, they wanted their own identity, they wanted their own sovereignty, they wanted their own country for Irish people, for the Irish people to live and to thrive in their own country, and to stop the British abusing and the abuse that was happening in the British occupation. That's what they wanted. They wanted their own country. We have our own ideas. We have our own values as Irish people, as Christians too, Catholics of course too. We have our own values, etc. But Micheál Martin says it was about the European Union basically we're fighting for. Like, come on now. Because none of them ever said we're going to fight for Germany, we're going to fight for the Netherlands, we're going to fight for Belgium, for whatever. Everybody was like, Ireland belongs to the Irish. Ireland is what we're fighting for. Ireland is what we're dying for. I don't think anybody who fell in the Civil War on the Irish Republic side said, I'm going to fight and die for some other country. I don't think they ever came out and said, I'm going to go and fight and die for some other country in Ireland in the War of Independence. They wanted their freedom and for their children to have freedom. But it's insane to look at it too. And I even looked up different people. Ian O'Duffy, for example, was the first Garda Síochána commissioner. He's from Mulholland there. Of course, he was the founder of Fine Gael too, one of the founders. And then obviously, we're not talking about the 1930s, I suppose. But then I looked up at a few other people, Eamon Devlin, for example. All in Irish, of course, too. But even other people, Thomas O'Higgins, too, the Minister for Justice at the time. Well, funny enough, he was assassinated next year. Thomas O'Higgins was assassinated in 1927. Thomas O'Higgins, the Minister for Justice. So next year will be the anniversary of that, 100 years, would you believe? And then obviously other famous people, Richard McCarthy, too, the former Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces under Michael Collins, of course, that time. And then other famous Irish people, Sean Lamass, famous Taoiseach too. Other people too, other famous Irish people. It's interesting to see. But it's sad that they didn't, like nowadays the census ask you a lot of questions in terms of how many women. Like years ago was very basic. They just wanted your name, how many children you had, are you married, what religion are you. To be totally honest, looking at even the Cavan census as a whole, looking at the majority of people in Cavan, nearly 90% were Catholic and stuff. And you can kind of see, often people wonder why there's only 3 counties, not in the Ulster and not in the 6 counties. And that's because Cavan had a huge Catholic population, as I say, 89%. It might not be a huge amount. Of course, Cavan didn't have that many people, 88,000, I think it was, something like that in 1926. But the population decreased a lot. Actually, I tell a lie, it was 81,000, yeah. But it decreased a lot from 91,000, so between 1911 and 1926, so it decreased a huge amount. Mainly due to probably the War of Independence. The First World War II, of course, happened. But the War of Independence and the First World War, and then, of course, the Civil War too didn't help out the matters. But so let me know. But I do think the people who were in 1926, regardless of who they were, I think they all were very proud that the Irish state became reality. What they fought for 800 years became a reality. And it must have been, just even looking back at my great-grandmother's time, it must have been something to behold, to have that like document saying Irish Free State census, after her living 20 years, 20-something years actually at the time, and her living under British occupation for the last 20-something years, to have a form saying Irish Free State, well, I suppose what she fought for too, because again, she was taking a risk of having ammunition, having guns in the house, putting people that were wanted by the Black and Tans. Some people that were wanted killed OIC officers, killed Black and Tans, hiding them in the house and stuff. And the Black and Tans they're not the nicest people. They wouldn't have, let's put it this way, there wouldn't be a trial. It'd be just, that would be dealt with, they would deal with it there and then. So she took a risk, and again, unfortunately in modern Ireland, this is forgotten about. People like in Commission Lamont, people in the Irish Volunteers, the Irish Citizen Army too, at the time was still operating too after the 1916 rising too, but all kind of merged into the Irish Republican Army, and the Irish Republican Brotherhood still is around to this day, but it mainly merged into that after the 1916 rise. But of course there was other organisations like the Women's League, the Women's Army, but it's mainly forgotten about. And I do think we should have probably released this census earlier, a few years ago, on the centenary of the War of Independence. But it's a pity that we couldn't. There wasn't a space for them to leave their thoughts. I think it was a missed opportunity back in 1926 when they were conducting. I know the state was under a lot of pressure at the time, with just being founded, etc. But I do think it was a missed opportunity to not get at least, even if they wanted to, a small paragraph of what they felt about the last few years in the 1920s, because Ireland went through historic change. The War of Independence, as I say, the Civil War and stuff. But a lot of people probably wouldn't want to talk about it because the Civil War divided the country. And obviously the divisions are still felt today in a lot of cases in families and stuff. So even back then, a lot of people wouldn't want to talk about it. Even my great-grandmother too, she didn't really want to talk too much about it. She talked a bit about the War of Independence, what she did during the War of Independence. And she talked about, she was born before the Easter Rise and stuff. She talked about hearing about that and stuff. But she never really talked too much, and this was in the last few years in life. She didn't really talk too much about everything. She was basically recluse from that. Of course, there was memories and stuff that, haunted memories, I suppose, especially about the Civil War and stuff. Going by family stories and stuff. That was one of the worst times for her, the Civil War. And she never talked. She talked about the War of Independence, the 1960s, other things, but she never talked much about the Civil War at all. It just goes to show you that a lot of people were, even though she wasn't hiding people during the Civil War and stuff, Cavan was a long way from, down the other side where they were anti-treaty protesters. Cavan was very pro-treaty. mainly because Calvin was kept in the Republic of Ireland too. But anyway, let me know what you think. What do you think? Subscribe for more and bye.